Good morning. Good to see all of you. Tried to catch the mic and dropped my phone. I'm glad, it's good to hear all of you. Thank you for being here. Man, sometimes I'm just sitting there, I'm just listening to you guys sing. I'm like, man, this is it. This is the kingdom of God worshiping together. Last week, we were a little bit thin. I think a lot of y'all were like just out partying or something because I saw all the Facebook posts, you know? And so, no, that's okay. Like, you're spending time with your family. That's all good. But man, we missed you. And I know you can go back and catch the sermon and stuff on live stream, but this matters, right? Getting to worship together, hearing the singing this week, that is just so encouraging to me. And I know when you guys are fired up, it gets me fired up. So let me just hit a few announcements real quick, and then we'll jump into our text for this morning. So if this is your primary way of getting Riverside news and announcements, I want to invite you to take a look at what we're now emailing out once a week. And so if you're one of those people that you just spammed all the Riverside emails because you were getting like 5 or 6 emails a day sometimes. One of the recent changes that we've made is you will get 1 email a week if you're signed up to receive our emails. And of course, if you want to receive prayer requests and things like that separately, you can sign up to receive those as well. And those will come from 2 different email addresses, so you can spam the one that you want. So every Wednesday, the Riverside Rundown comes out. Do we have this that we can click through, Raleigh? If no, that's okay. I see him looking around with that look in it. Okay, I'm getting a thumbs up. So the Riverside Rundown, by the way, if you're not getting this is sent out to our email list that's comprised of our members here. If you're not getting this, it may be because while you attend Riverside, you haven't bought in yet. You haven't placed membership here with our church. So we do have membership forms available. If you worship with us, if you call this your church home, allow our elders to shepherd you and hold themselves accountable for praying for you and leading you. That's what elders in the church are for. But if you feel like your needs aren't being met, it may just be because you haven't really joined our church. So you worship with our church, but maybe you haven't joined. And so I would just encourage you, pick up a membership form, grab me afterwards, or talk to an elder, talk to Cassie, talk to one of us afterwards, get a membership packet, and join in, because we don't just want you attending, we want to see you serving, we want to see you building relationships with people around you. We want your spiritual life to thrive, and part of how we do that is our church community. So the Riverside Rundown, I'm realizing now that it's up there, but it's not on my screen here, so I don't know how long y'all been looking at this. So as you go through, you'll see all of the announcements that are coming up, and you can click on them and sign up and get involved. It's all interactive. We've got upcoming events, so you'll see there, for example, October 30th at 2 p.m. is Beth and Connor's baby shower. I don't see them in their normal spot. See, they were here last week when all y'all were gone, but they... all the other things that are coming up, our pantry needs. Guys, thank you so much for donating and giving and restocking our food pantry. That is blessing a lot of people right now in the holiday season. Small group signups, all of it's right here in our weekly email. And man, if you aren't getting those emails, you're missing out on how we walk together in this faith community that is Riverside. So sign up for that, join that, jump in, man, get involved. October 29th is our trunk or treat. Can we click over to that real quick? I'm probably skipping some stuff there. That's okay. October 29th is our trunk or treat. If you haven't signed up for a trunk, the sign-up sheets are out there on the lobby desk. And so just sign up, host a trunk, give out candy, have a lot of fun. This is our opportunity to show our community that we're not afraid of pagan holidays, but the church is to redeem pagan holidays. We did the same thing with Christmas, right? We turned the biggest pagan holiday of the year, which was winter solstice, into the biggest celebration of Jesus of the year. And we did that like 1,500 years ago, right? And we've been celebrating it ever since. If you ever wondered, like, the Bible says Jesus was born in the spring, and yet we celebrate Christmas in winter, it's because we just jacked a pagan holiday and claimed it for Christ, right? And we do the same thing for Halloween, man. It's a pagan holiday. Some people are afraid of that, and we say, no, this is our opportunity to show our community what we're about. We're not going to hide it. We're not going to run from it. We're going to redeem it, because that is how we shine our light into a dark world. So join us October 29th. Help us serve our community just by encouraging them, loving on them, letting them know who we are. Again, you can sign up out there. I'm missing something. What am I missing? Oh, there is a trunk or treat meeting. Thank you. Trunk or treat meeting after Bible class. Is that right? Adult room 2, back here after Bible class. So if you're one of the young adults that's having Bible class back there, guess what? You just signed up for a meeting you didn't even know. So those of you that are already meeting back there, stay back there. And the rest of us, when we're done with Bible class in here, we will head back there for a trunk or treat planning and information meeting. So if you're hesitant to sign up because you don't know what you're signing up for, come to the meeting. If you've already signed up, come to the meeting. It will be valuable information to you. Okay. Let's jump in. Are you guys ready? I'm warmed up this morning. We kind of took a break off from our Numbers series last week, so let me spend about 20 seconds just catching you back up. So in the book of Numbers, we've preached 14 chapters of Numbers so far. This is God leading his people in the wilderness, and where we left off 2 weeks ago was God has promised the generation of Moses that because of their faithlessness and disobedience, they are not going to enter in the promised land. They're going to wander around the wilderness for 40 years until the faithless amongst them die off so that the next generation can enter the promised land. And so that's where we were. And so we saw God deal harsh justice to his people for the sake of his future promise of building his kingdom. And so that's where we're going to pick up, and we're going to see a little bit of a different tone in the rest of Numbers. So for the rest of this book, as we preach through it up until New Year, what we're going to see is God is now in the mode where he is disciplining his people and teaching his people to obey. The training wheels have come off. It is a literal do or die season for the Israelites, and that's the text that we're jumping into. So as we take a look at this, this past week, a guy who's a young preacher, no, he's a youth minister rather. He's a youth minister at a big church in Arlington, Texas, sent me over a piece of paper that he had found. He was going through some of his old stuff, and he sends me the flyer that I had made the time that I had him come and speak at the youth rally that we were putting on. And so this flyer is, terrible formatting. It was 2014. So we're looking at 8 years ago. And so by that time, I had been in the pulpit for a couple of years, but because I started out in youth and family ministry, I had this connection to this church where I was able to serve as a youth intern and then serve as their youth minister. And then we'd go to preaching school, we'd come back for the summer and we'd serve. And every year when we come back from preaching school, we would throw this big youth rally. And I look back on it, I'm amazed that they let me get away with all the things that we got away with, because we were pushing boundaries, we were being edgy, we were preaching and teaching young people on topics that nobody was talking about. And so we had this youth rally called Up and Out, and it was all about equipping next generation faith. And there's so much that I was embarrassed by when he sent me that flyer. The formatting, the attempts to be cool in the language that we were using in the flyer. Like, there's so much of it that's super cringy, right? But there's a lot of it that I look at, and I'm like, you know what? I can at least say that we have been laser focused. Janae and I have been laser focused on our calling for over a decade now. Because you look in that same flyer and you see the class that Janae and I were teaching at that youth rally, and it was something about taking a look at the state of churches of Christ in America today and equipping young people to revitalize that church movement. And I'm sitting there going, that's just all we've been doing. Like, my entire ministry has just been that. It's being, let's talk about the state of church today and figure out how we can hand something better to the young people than what was handed to us. And we've been preaching and teaching and pushing for that for a decade now of just good, solid ministry. And so the guy who sent me the flyer this is another thing. I'm just like, I don't know that I would do that today. But I was like 26, 27 around then. And so we were putting on this youth rally. And at 27 years old, I decided, you know what? I might be too young to reach these like 16, 17-year-olds, because I'm in my mid-20s. I'm like an old man in their eyes by that point. Now I'm 35. I'm like, I don't even pretend to think I'm cool in the eyes of our youth anymore at all, right? But I'm looking at this flyer, and the picture, the big keynote picture is this boy and girl. I don't know if they were dating back then. They weren't dating. Okay, a boy and a girl named Savannah and a guy named Mason. Mason's the one who sent me a flyer. He's the 20-something-year-old youth minister now. But when he was keynoting at this youth rally, he was 19 years old. Because in my wisdom, the wisdom of like 2 years in ministry, my wisdom said, well, 26-year-olds are way too old to be keynotes at youth rallies. We need people close to their age. So we got this 19-year-old kid to come in and speak about how to lead in that arena. Like the arena that all of the rest of us left a long time ago. Like, how do we prepare and equip young people to carry the faith further than we have carried it? And so I was looking back on that, and I'm looking at that, I'm going, man, like I look at those guys, and I look at all the things we were talking about, and I look at all of the people that we were getting to speak at these events, and I look at him now, and you look at Mason now. He was like the 19-year-old. He had like the long flippy hair that all the girls loved, and now he's like full-on dad mode. He's got like kids at home and a wife, and he wears like the dad hat, and like I assume he probably like goes home and cracks open a Budweiser. Like he has that aesthetic. Even if he doesn't drink, that's his aesthetic, right? Like it's full-on dad mode aesthetic, and it's only been like 8 years since then, right? Here's what I want to talk to you about this morning. What we're going to see in the text is that the God we worship is a God of generations. This concept that has been put on my heart for the last decade of equipping the next generation to be able to carry the torch into darker places than we ever carried it, that has always been the heart of my ministry. And it seems to be, as we look in this text, it's always been the heart of God. That God is a God of all generations. And he's going to be the God of your generation and the God of the next generation. And if we measure up to the calling with which we have been called, if we take our faith seriously, we're going to equip the next generation so that the church will continue on, so that the God of the heavens will be the God of that generation as well. Let's take a look at our text. Numbers chapter 15. And I'll show you why we're talking about this. First of all, we almost skipped this chapter. I need y'all to know that. And we're going to skip most of it. This is one of those chapters that if you read this a dozen times, you're like, I don't know where the sermon's at in this, okay? It's just one of those chapters where it's weird, and there's parts of this where you're like, oof, that's harsh. Like God is no longer giving any more grace to these rebellious, faithless people anymore. Like at this point, he's like, this is my standard. This is how I'm going to grow you. This is where I'm taking you. And if you step out of line, I'm going to get the entire camp to exact my justice on you, even if that means stoning you to death. That's the period that we're in, and how God is carrying his people through this very tough wilderness journey. So the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, after you enter the land that I'm giving you. So here's what I want you to see. Just take a look at this. God is setting his people up for the future. They've got 40 years of walking in the wilderness, and God's already teaching them. The things we're going through right now is training for when you get the promised land. Because there's going to be a day where I'm going to give you the promised land, and you've got to be able to steward it well. You've got to be able to hold on to the blessings, because if you don't hold on to the blessings, you're going to lose it to the adversary, and the people that suffer most when you lose your faith are the people coming up behind you. Because whatever you have left to hand them is going to be something that they're not going to be able to steward well, because you didn't equip them or disciple them or empower them or even encourage them, because you blundered your own faith journey. And so he's like, I've got 40 years to get you ready for the promised land. So everything I'm teaching you now is for the future. And so, church, what God is teaching you today is not just so that you can get through tomorrow. It's to equip you and the people coming up behind you for the future. He says, after you enter the land I'm giving you, way in the future, 40 years from now, way then, when you enter that land, And as you present to the Lord food offerings from the herd of the flock, as an aroma pleasing to the Lord, whether burnt offerings or sacrifices. So you had the grain offerings that would be this pleasing aroma to the Lord, and that is, God, you've blessed me with so much, I'm going to be generous and give back to you. And then you have these burnt offering sacrifices that are an atonement sacrifice. You guys don't care about any of that. Okay, it's Old Testament sacrificial system. The reason why this matters to us is because God sets up the sacrificial system so that he can just dunk on it when he sends Jesus later on. That's the only reason. Like, he invented the sport that he could excel at by sending his son who, like, crushes the sport. Does that make sense? You guys with me? Like, he's going to invent a process where he's going to be like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to let your sin go unpunished, and so I'm going to require a blood sacrifice for the sin that you commit, all with the long game in mind, going so that one day I can send my son to be the perfect sacrifice so that you don't have to sacrifice grain and goats ever again, because his blood will be the sacrifice that forgives you for all your sin, past, present, and future. So anytime you're reading about this really obscure stuff in the Old Testament, understand God has a view for the future church in mind, and that's why he's setting it up the way he's doing it. So as you make your food offerings, and it's an aroma that's pleasing to the Lord, whether burnt offerings or sacrifice for special vows or freewill offerings or festival offerings. We're going to skip down a little bit because it's just a lot of just talking about that. Like, this is how you make a sacrifice to God. You jump down to verse 13. Everyone who is native born must do these things in this way when they present a food offering as an aroma pleasing to the Lord. For the generations to come. Actually, can we go back a little bit? There's something I do want you to see, like verse 5 or so. Do we have that in here? Okay, that's okay if we don't see it. So when you read this, here's how you make your grain offering, okay? When you make your grain offering, I'll just explain it to you. There's a lot of information. If you're reading this in Numbers chapter 15 in your Bible, what you'll see is that he tells you how to do it. He's like, you take some flour, and it's got to be like the really good flour. It's not your leftovers. It's the best flour you got. You take your best flour, you take your best oil, you mix it together, and you burn it. And every Cajun in here is like, yeah, we got that. That's called a roux, right? And look, just like every Cajun, look, last week we went to small groups, and like Tuesday was cold. And because Tuesday was cold, everyone fed me gumbo on Wednesday, because that's how it works down here in Cajun country, right? So I show up to the office Wednesday morning, and Cassie brought in gumbo that she had made, and it was awesome. And then that night we went to small group, and Mark and Nikki had made gumbo for our group, and it was awesome because it got cold one time. So every Cajun in Lafayette is like, it's time to break out the flour and the oil, and we're gonna burn it until it becomes this roux. And you say the same thing that God says. When you do it like that, it's a sweet aroma that's pleasing to both Cajuns and the Lord, right? So that's how you do the grain offering. It's flour, oil. It's just Cajun cooking way before y'all even knew it was a thing. He says, for the generations to come, let me make sure you see that. You're going to present your food offering to the Lord for the generations to come. So God is thinking future tense about future generations, and then he's also thinking about outsiders. So keep that in mind. The church is not for us alone. The church has never been exclusive. It's not for the spiritual people. It's not for the super religious people. It's not for the moral people. The big overall theme here is, regardless of what generation you're in, and regardless if you're treated like an insider or an outsider, God is for you, and God says his system is for you, and his church is for you, and his people are for you. So don't let God's people tell you that you don't belong there when God says you belong. If you're a new member at Riverside, what you'll notice about me is I will give you as much opportunity to serve and get involved as the people that have been here for years and years and years and years. And sometimes that comes at the cost of frustrating the people that have been at Riverside for years and years and years and years. Because our thing is, look, when you're new here, when you're coming in here, my goal is to equip you and disciple you and pastor you and encourage you and get you ready so that you can do all all of that for other people. So I'm going to, as soon as I can, I'm going to nudge you out of your comfort zone and see if I can get you in a group, get you serving in a ministry, get you giving generously, get you joining our church and fellowshipping with our church. Like, I'm going to do everything I can to empower you, because the foreigner is just as important and valuable to God as the person who already feels like they belong there. For the generations to come, so God is a God of all generations. Whenever a foreigner or anyone else living among you presents an offering as an aroma pleasing to the Lord, they must do exactly as you do. The community is to have the same rules for you and for the foreigner residing among you. This is a lasting ordinance for what? Generations to come. This is a lasting ordinance for generations to come. So let me say it again. God is telling his people, what I'm doing for you is not just for you. What I'm doing for my people is not just for my people. It's for generations to come, and it's for everyone that has just wandered in, that feels like a foreigner and an outsider, that walks in with all their insecurities and all their uncertainties, and they go, I don't know if this is for me. I don't know if I belong here. I don't know if I fit in with these people. And God goes, you don't treat them differently. You don't have a different rule for outsiders as you do for insiders. The God of his church is the same God for all of those that are desperately looking for his church. He says, you and the foreigner shall be the same before the Lord. You and the foreigner shall be the same before the Lord. For all generations to come. That means your way of doing it might not be the only way of doing it. That means your process might not be the only process. Your generation's method or model of expressing your faith may not be the be-all and end-all of faith expression amongst the Christian community, because God is not just the God of your generation, and he's not just the God of your people. He's the God of the foreigners, and he's the God of the generations to come. Remember what he told these same people as they started this Exodus journey. Can we jump over to Exodus chapter 3? So remember, Mount Sinai is where we get it's where we get Deuteronomy, the book of Deuteronomy. On their journey out of Exodus, or out of Egypt into Mount Sinai, you have the book of Exodus. And on their journey from Mount Sinai to the Promised Land, you have the book of Numbers. And so on their first journey in the book of Exodus, he says this: say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. How many generations did he just name? 3 generations, right? So the same God who's the God of Jacob is the same God who's the God of Isaac, who's the same God who's the God of Abraham. So that's 3 generations that God is speaking to. And he says, this God, the God of your fathers, he says, this is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. That's right after the great I am verse, where God says, you shall call me the I am. And he goes over all that, like, I was here before you, I'll be here after you, I am the first and the last, I'm the Alpha, the Omega, I am the great I am. And then he says, but that's not just for you. See, I'm also the God of your forefathers. I'm the God of your great-grandfathers. I was the God of that generation, and I'll be the God of the next generation as well. He says, this is my name, the name that you shall call me forever from generation to generation. And the question this morning is, are we allowing God to do to us what he's doing to his people in the Israelites? Are we allowing God to prepare us not just for our faith journey, but for the faith journey of the generations to come? In other words, we're not building a church that can endure the next 5 or 10 years. We're building a church that's going to be here, reaching people in this community 30 years from now, 40 years from now, 100 years from now, and we're just going to keep plugging away, getting better and better, and reaching more and more people until Jesus Christ comes back, because our job as Christians is to pass everything that God has built up in us from generation to generation. There is always an idea that we don't stop with us We don't stop here. You look around the room and you go, I'm so thankful for my church family, but we're not done yet. This isn't good enough yet. It's not just the God of Riverside. It's the God of all people, the outsiders and the foreigners as well. It's not just the God of us. It's the God of everyone who's coming in after us. All the young people that are going, I don't know if I buy your faith. I don't know if I accept that. I don't know if I believe in your God. And we go, whatever we do not stop preaching and teaching and loving and equipping and encouraging the people around us until we have effectively passed the baton from generation to generation. That's the goal. That's the mission of the church. We are to go into all the world and make disciples, and in order to go into all the world, we have to go into every time zone and every time period until Jesus comes back. We pass our faith from generation to generation. The church is not for you. One of the number one selling Christian book of all time, second to the Bible, weirdly enough, is Rick Warren's book, Purpose Driven Life. Anybody know what the first sentence of Purpose Driven Life is? You shouldn't. You shouldn't know the first sentence. It's nerdy if you do. So the first sentence of Purpose Driven Life is it's not about you. That's how he opens the book. It's not about you. It's an entire book about teaching you how to live a life of purpose, how to get you walking out, how to get you out of this kind of walking dead, zombified existence where you just kind of go to work and go home and party on the weekend and just get through your life until you die. It calls you out of that and goes, I want to teach you how to live a Christian life of purpose. And the very first opening line is, it's not about you. It's not about you. And so this idea that like, well, that's my church. We do it. I've been there for a long. It's not your church. It's also the church for the foreigners and the outsiders and the left out and the forgotten and the bedraggled and the left behind and the marginalized and the downtrodden and the people far from God and all of those whose Jesus' heart broke for. It's the church for those whom Christ is most for. And yes, it's your church. Yes, it's for you, but it's not just for you. What a mistake we make when we think, oh, well, you're not there. You're not on my level yet. You're not as spiritual as I am. You're not as religious. I'm one of the good Christians, and maybe one day when you're mature in your faith, you will be too. No, the church is never exclusive. It's never you versus me. It's never them versus us. It's going, no, this is the God of all generations and all people. And so we welcome the outsiders. We welcome the foreigners. We welcome the burnt out and the left out and the forgotten. All of them have a place in our church because God says, I am a God of all generations. I was a God of their generations. All the things you don't like about the way church used to be done before your time, I was the God for them too. I got them through. They passed the baton to you, and now you are building churches and reaching people and showing the gospel to lost people all over the world. And the young people behind you coming up that you're afraid of, the ones that you're like, they're going to mess up the church is just going to collapse as soon as we pass the baton to them. God's saying, guess what? I'm the God of that generation too. And all of those people that feel left out, like they don't have a place, I'm the God of them as well. We see in Deuteronomy, let's see, do we have this one? Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 18 and 19. He says, he defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. God loves the foreigner. And therefore, he says, and you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt. Some of you have been a Christian a long time. You've been a Christian long enough that you forget what it feels like to be left out, to be outside the camp. You remember Miriam and her leprosy being left outside the camp for 7 days? You remember, some of you, if you think back real hard, you remember what it was like to be dead in your sin in captivity in Egypt. And you were a foreigner in a strange land, and it took you having to give up and cry out to God for God to go, I'm going to save you from that. I'm going to set you free from your bondage. I'm going to take you from being a foreigner. I'm going to build a people around you, and I'm going to give you my promised land so that you can't ever feel like you don't belong ever again, because from this point on, you are mine. And he tells us that, he goes, don't you remember you were foreigners? You were in Egypt. You were lost in your trespasses. You were burdened by your sin. You were the outsider that has been separated from the inheritance promised by a holy God because of the sins that you committed. And so, why do you love those who are outside of our church? Rather than judge them, rather than hate them, rather than demean them, rather than criticize them and condemn them on social media, rather than trying to force them into thinking how you think by running to the voting booth and trying to get government to do what God's been trying to get his church to do, rather than doing any of that, we don't fear them, we don't fight them, we're not against them. He says we love them and we encourage them, we clothe them, we feed them because God loves the foreigners, because you were a foreigner once as well. He says, I'm a God that is for the outsider, and therefore you're going to be a church of people that are for the outsider, because if you remember back far enough, there was a time when you yourself were an outsider. If you haven't gotten the theme of this sermon, it's just this, guys. God is bigger than you think he is, and he's for more people than you think he's for. God likes people that you don't like. He ushers in and accepts people that you have a hard time loving and accepting. And so the message is, let us begin to worship the God that is for all generations, that is for both his people and the outsiders as well. And let us knock off this idea of being exclusive Christians, but rather go, no, we treat the people inside the same way we treat the people outside, because all of them are worthy of the grace of a loving God, because all of us walk into this with the same kind of unforgivable sin debt, and through God's scandalous mercy and grace, he loves us anyway, so why not then love them? Jumping back into our text in Numbers chapter 15. We'll see it a couple more times. I want you to pay attention to the language. This is a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. You and the foreigner shall be the same before the Lord. The same laws and regulations will apply to both to you and to the foreigner residing among you, the Lord said to Moses. Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land to which I'm taking you, and you eat the food of the land, present a portion of an offering to the Lord, present a loaf from the first of your ground meal, and present it as an offering from the threshing floor. It's really interesting because the first few verses, he's like, to make a proper grain offering, or in Cajun speak, to make a proper roux, you've got flour, you've got oil, and then if you're like me, you're like, where's the meat? And so then the very next thing, he's like, and here's how to do a burnt offering. You just throw a little cow in there, add some beef, add some smoked meat, you've got yourself a pleasing aroma before the Lord. And then you get down here, and he's like, now we need our carbs. So here's how you do a grain offering that involves the bread and all of that as well. And so he says, present a loaf from the first of your ground meal, present it as an offering from the threshing floor, and throughout the generations to come, throughout all the generations to come, you are to give this offering to the Lord from the first of your ground meal. And so this is just another reminder of God going, these things that I'm teaching you, these things are not just to get you through the wilderness, it's to get you to live a blessed life in the promised land. And it's not just for you, it's so that all the generations after you know how to walk in a way that is blessed by God. He says, now, if you as a community unintentionally fail to keep any of these commandments the Lord gave Moses, and any of the Lord's commandments to you through him, from the day the Lord gave them, continuing through the generations to come, and we can stop there. That's a good text in that. I want you to pay attention to that. He goes, these commandments that I'm giving you, they're not just for you. They're not just for you to follow. They're for the generations to come, for all the generations. Something that I did not expect. In fact, I don't think I ever expected this, actually, and I'm not really sure what this does to the future of the churches in our area. But this year, for the first time ever, my generation went from the least church generation to the most church generation. I don't know what to preach on anymore, guys. You guys have heard me for years now point to those of you that are older than me and go, hey, don't point the finger at us so quickly. You guys managed to raise the least church generation. And I've been saying it over and over, like our churches are in trouble because people my age and down are rejecting Jesus. They don't want to fellowship with believers. They are the lost generation. And then COVID happens. And the great resignation and the great reset happens, and people start hopping around churches, and people start leaving the toxic, abusive church systems that they were a part of before, and they start looking for something else, and we see this big generational shift. Our baby boomer generation, which was the largest generation, has been, since they were like, some of you guys, if you're a baby boomer, since you were like 12 years old, you've been the most church generation ever. Like, you've always had people your age at church since you were like 12 or 13. Like, the baby boomers became the most church generation for the majority of their life. But now, as you guys know, as you guys are getting older, there's starting to be a time of passing the torch. And some of it's just health related. A lot of our older members just didn't come back after COVID, just statistically. They were like, you know what, this is a good time for me to kind of check out. Like, they've got it, it's fine. And so all of a sudden, our baby boomers are now the least church generation. And we'll start counting you young people, you like 20-somethings and down, you Gen Zers. So if you're too young to be a millennial, we'll start counting you guys in a couple years. You know how churches are with young people. Like, we don't even start talking about you as people until you guys start tithing. I don't know why that is. But no, that's a real thing. Like, I remember like 10 years ago, I remember going to conferences and like hearing like 60, 70-year-old people go, let's talk about these millennials. Let's talk about how to reach this young generation. I'm sitting there going, we are 35 and like planting churches now. Like, you should have been talking about this 20 years ago, right? And we're doing the same thing to y'all's generation as well. Like, we'll finally start paying attention to you in another 10 years when we just don't have another way. And look, that's not okay and that's not fair, and we're gonna do everything we can to do it better. I'm just trying to tell you how it is right now. But we've seen this shift. All of a sudden, it's my age is what is in churches right now. And if you're sitting there going, I don't know what to do with that, I don't either. I was not prepared for that. I've been saying for my entire ministry, I've been saying, I think my job is to take the church from our baby boomers who did with Christianity in America what had never been done before. I mean, they basically churched an entire country and built these really big churches that could fellowship a lot of people, pushed faith to corners that it hasn't been pushed before. All of a sudden, that's the generation that turned church digital for the first time. Like, they gave us live streams and online sermons and that kind of stuff. Like, your generation took Christianity and just pushed it to a point that we've never seen before. And most of it's awesome. Some of it's terrible. Some of it is like, hey, maybe we shouldn't turn Christianity into a commodity. Maybe we shouldn't market it the way we do everything else in our country. That's probably not okay. But on the other side, we have reached people that never would have been reached because of our older generation. And now they're handing the torch to the millennial generation. And there's a lot of us, they're sitting there going, I don't know what stage I'm in right now, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. It was... who was it? I think it was Tony Morgan that I heard talking about this, who runs the Unstuck Church Group. He's like a church consulting group. And he talks about how everybody has periods of firsts and bests and lasts. And so if I lose you when I start talking about different generations and different age groups and that kind of stuff, that's fine. As long as you guys know what stage you're in. Are you in your season of firsts, your season of bests, or your season of lasts? And your whole life is in one of those stages, but also each new journey, each new adventure, each new relationship goes through the same cycle of firsts and bests and lasts. And so when I started dating Janae at 15, some of my most memorable dates were the hokiest, like cheapest, lamest dates that you can imagine, but I remember them not because they were the best dates we've ever been on, but because they were firsts. You remember your first date with the person that you love? You remember some of those first moments, the first kiss, the first time you said, I love you? I can still, we've been married 16 years, and I can still remember the time that Janae and I told each other that we loved each other for the first time. Those seasons are special, not because they're your best seasons, not because they're your healthiest seasons, just because they're your first seasons. And when it's first, everything is new and exciting and passionate and rejuvenated and vitalized and vivified. Like everything just breathes life into everything else you're doing when you're in a season of firsts. Guys, the church suffers when we're not empowering our 16 to 25-year-old age range in our church. When we're not handing the keys to them and go and teach and equip and disciple and build and learn and stretch and reach all the people that we are never going to reach because you're still willing to do all the things that the rest of us are no longer willing to do. Like you young people, listen, we need you in our church. And we don't just need you existing in our church. We need you leading our church because your season of firsts reminds us what it's like to feel passionate about this stuff again. Like we just sang a couple of songs. You guys sang with enthusiasm songs that I look at and go, man, I remember cheesing through that song in the 90s, right? Like we haven't even switched up. We're still singing. But to some of you, man, you sing it like it's the first time you're singing it. And for some of you new believers in our church, it really is the first time that you've ever worshiped God to these songs that to some of us we go, oh, this song again, right? And the church becomes so cynical. We become so disenchanted and so jaded and so burnt out, and our flame dies down when we no longer have people that remind us that this is still new for some of them, that this is exciting for them, that their passion is in this because for them, it's a season of firsts. I've got a young couple that Janae and I have gotten to, that we've just gotten the honor of getting to mentor them and kind of be pastor figures in their life. And that's not because we're particularly wise or have so much to show them. It's because they are gracious enough to allow us the privilege of getting to speak into their life that way. And look, let me just say, to those of you that you look at me up here and you go, that's my preacher, right? And you just allow us the grace to just get to be your minister. It's a privilege. And I apologize for all the times that I take that for granted because that's a really special and sacred thing. And you don't let me be your minister because I'm anything special. You just allow that because, you know, it's good when we allow ourselves to be encouraged by the people that God has called to encourage us. And so there's this young couple. I remember sitting with this young woman when she was a teenage girl at church camp. We'd sit together and we'd talk because both of us had trauma. Both of us had unstable seasons in our childhood and therefore have some of the same like traumatic responses, like the same coping mechanisms to the world. And so we just hit it off because we both had the same like cynicism, I guess. I don't know. And then she starts dating. This is interesting to almost no one, but I'll say it. She starts dating the little brother of the guy who I was just talking about, who was the young guy on the youth flyer. And this guy is even 5 years younger. And so she starts dating him, and he is the opposite. He doesn't have the same kind of childhood trauma. It took us a little bit while to kind of click because he is as like young suburban white church kid as you can imagine. You know the type? It's a type. You guys, y'all are looking at me like I'm crazy. Like that is a type, right? If I showed you a picture of this kid, you'd be like, oh yeah, that type, right? And so they start dating, and they're just wildly different people, and they fall in love, and they live in 2 different states, and they're like one of those church camp couples. They met at church camp, they fell in love at church camp, they started dating at church camp, and all the rest of us are like, oh, y'all are cute, but that never works. And then it works. They got married, and they went to school, and he says, I'm going to go into ministry, I want to be a preacher. And so that's when he gave me the grace of just getting to hopefully share with him some of the lessons I've learned off of my own bad beats. And so now he took his first preaching job up in Arkansas, and he's 22 years old, I think. So to a lot of you, you're like, that is a baby. Who gave him a preaching position, right? 22 years old behind the pulpit, and he's crushing it. And I'm going to go home today. I'm going to go home. I'm going to nap. And then I'm going to listen to my sermon and write down all the dumb things I said and all the things that I messed up in my sermon and like chastise myself over it. And then I'm going to go listen to his sermon so I can do all the same thing and send him a list of all the things he did wrong. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, I listened to his sermon. And here's the thing. I look at this 22-year-old preacher and I'm going, man, he is in a season of firsts. And so everything he preaches has that excitement and energy and vigor of somebody that's preaching this for the first time and their eyes are wide open to receive the mysteries of God. I look at that, I listen to him, I go, man, that church needs that young 22-year-old preacher. And it's a church of predominantly older people. And for that reason specifically, they need that young person in the pulpit reminding them what it's like to feel something when they open up the Word of God and have an encounter with the Creator of the universe. Because some of us have just been doing it for so long that we no longer feel that God is still a God for our generation. And so look, if you're in your season of firsts, if you're a new Christian, if you're just young still and you've got your youth and your vigor, please don't hold out on us. Share with us what you're excited about. Live out your passion in front of us, because a lot of us need the reminder. We need you young people in our church. Because somewhere along the line, you're going to slide from your season of firsts to your season of bests. And it's a lot healthier if you have a long season of bests, right? Don't go from a season of first to a season of last just because of your own immaturity and lack of willingness to grow as a person. I encourage you, have a long season of bests. And so some of you guys, you know what it's like to be in your bests. That's when you're driven by your ambition. You're driven by what you're really motivated. You've been through the training season. The training wheels have come off. You know who you are. You know how God is calling you. And so I've realized that right now, I think and I hope, right now, I'm in that transition process of I look at this stuff and I go, man, I preached that before. It's no longer new and exciting. I preached it before, but now I can do it better. And look, I've counseled this issue before, but the first time I fumbled through it and they gave me a lot of grace because my heart was in it. But now, maybe, hopefully by the grace of God, maybe I've got a little bit more to offer. And you enter your season of best. And you're going, you know what? I'm going to be the best person I can be as a spouse. I'm going to be the best person I can be as a parent. I mean, the best person I can be in my career. And you really get to live out your best life and produce your best work in your season of bests. I'm excited. I'm excited about being in this season of life because I know I got by the first 10 years of ministry. I got by on being a little bit provocative, a little bit sensational, a little bit edgy, saying the things that no one would say. And you can do that when you're in your season of first. You can mess up and people give you grace for it because we're like, well, we know what he's trying to say, right? But at some point, you got to go, no, man, I got to get a hold of this. And I got to steward this well. And I got to be the person that God is calling me to be. Because right now, I'm at that age where I've got enough wisdom and I've still got enough energy and I've got enough vigor that if I'm not hitting the standard that God has for me, if I'm not achieving what God has called me to, if I'm not measuring up to the calling with which he has called me to, the only person I have to blame is me because I've been through the fire. I've been through the training season. I've walked through the grief. I've experienced the tragedy. I've been fortified by the perseverance that only comes from the Holy Spirit after God drags you through something. I've studied it and I've trained for it and I've gotten myself ready so that I can step into the best season of my life. And there's so many of you where God's going, man, what are you waiting for? Why are you still on milk when I'm calling you to be mature in your faith and be on solid food right now? Stop acting like all of this is new and enter your season of bests. I love what we are doing as a church right now. I love getting to work with Janae and Cassie in the office. And I love the eldership that we have right now because I think all of us are in our best season of ministry. And we're definitely still learning. And I hope 10 years from now, I'm like, no, now I'm in my best because all that was bad. Maybe. But I definitely think there's that season where you go, yeah, I'm not new at this anymore. So now I better take this seriously. I better step up and I better live out the life that God is calling me to live. And I better become the person that God is calling me to be because before I know it, I'll be in my season of lasts. If you're a part of the generation that you're starting to approach that, you're like, you know what? I might have a lot of time left. I might not have a lot of time left. Like this might be the last time that I go to my kid's baseball game. You guys ever think about that? I don't know. Some of you, like if you're if you're 45, then you might have gone to your last kid's baseball game at 45, and you still got like perhaps the majority of your life ahead of you, maybe, if you're lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. Like, you might have a lot of life on the other side of 45, but you're already starting to reach some of those lasts, right? Like, oh yeah, my kid's done with that stage of life. I might not have that ever again. And I've seen ministers walk into the pulpit with this mentality of, you know what, this might be the last time I ever preach on this subject. When you're in your season of lasts, things, simple things, normal things, take on the weight of eternal significance, don't they? This is, who was I listening to? I was listening to, I forget his name. He's an 80-something-year-old minister who is not preaching anymore. He stopped preaching at about 65. And so sometimes he still guest speaks. And that's one of the things he was talking about. He's like, man, in this season of my life, like when I preach on heaven, I'm aware that it might be the last sermon I ever preach on heaven. And so now when I do something, I'm aware that this isn't just for immediate return. This is me planting seeds in a garden that I'm never going to get to see. This is me giving something to the world, and hopefully it's something of value, because this might be the last time I ever get to do this. And so look, those of you that are in your season of last, please know, we're not leaving you behind. We haven't forgotten about you. I know that we give our attention to the younger generations in this church for the most part. My prayer is that you will too. That you will realize that for some of you, you're in your season of last, and the best way you can live a life that honors God is to instill that wisdom to the people coming up behind you. And I see some of you do it. I see some of you older members, the way you love on the young people, the way you make space for the young people, the way you teach the young people some of the lessons that you've learned in your life. And you do it with the eternal weight that this might be the last time I ever get to share this story. This might be the last opportunity I have to put my stamp on the next generation in the way that they do church. So I better have the talk, and I better not shy away, and I better not pull punches. I better be very open and very vulnerable and very honest with the conversation that we're about to have, because I might not get to have this conversation again, and I don't want to leave this world only to look God in the eyes and say, I didn't have the courage to hand to them what somebody handed me. I took the faith that was given to me, and I decided that I worship the God of my generation, that I didn't worship the God of all generations. And so I held on to it until my last breath rather than giving it to the people around me. Whether you're in your first or your best or your last, this church needs you. We need all generations because we worship a God of all generations. We need all generations working together in this church. We need the outsiders and the insiders. We need the foreigners and the long-time born and raised members of this church. We need all of us working together, because if we're going to reach all generations, we have to be a church of all generations. If we're going to equip the next generation, then we have to serve and honor the God that is the God of generation to generation. If we're going to be a church that goes, church isn't just for me and my way of doing it isn't the only way. I want to reach the next people. I want to equip them. I want to pass the baton in such a way that they will carry their cross further than I carried it. Then we have to be a church that goes, there is room for all of us to serve and all of us to love and all of us to get busy and all of us to win souls for Jesus, because God has never just been for us. He's always been for them as well. And therefore, if we're going to be the church of all generations, if we're going to reach all generations, if we're going to reach all the parts of the earth, then there's a lot of us that have to become okay with the fact that I've got to pass the baton. I can't keep doing it. I can't keep holding on to the faith as if it's mine to guard and protect, when Jesus goes, no, it's not yours. You're supposed to give it away. You're supposed to pass it on. In 2000, let's see, in 1992 was the first time that they did this study. In 1992, they said that about 40%, 45% of people in ministry that were professionally working for churches were less than 55 years old. And about 55% were above 55 years old. Now, and then in 2017, it was like 25% were below 55 years old. And now it's something like the median age, it used to be the median age of a minister was 45 in the 90s, and then in the early 2000s, the median age of a minister was like 50. Now the median age for a minister is like 58. It's like almost 60 years old. And so just absorb that for a second. So the average age of a church pastor is 58 years old right now in our country. And this was the year that age group became the least church generation. And now the most church generation is like 37 and down. So the majority of people in church are young adults, and yet we've all experienced the great leadership problem, right? The great leadership problem is we got so good at doing what we did that we just kept doing it. And we kept doing it, and we kept doing it. And in that process, we failed to train them. We failed to prepare the next generation to do it. We never passed the baton to them. We never gave them agency. We never gave them the authority to just step up and live out their faith in big and monumental ways. And so what happened is we had less and less leaders, less and less people stepping up, and the ministers just kept getting older and older, and the church leaders just keep getting older and older because they don't have anyone to pass the baton to, because we had an entire generation of Christians that did not train the next generation of leaders. And I look at those numbers, I go, man, we've got a problem. Because every Church of Christ I know is looking around going, man, I wish we had more elders, but we just don't have the men ready to step up and serve. And we asked them, we talked to them, and they just don't want to. And I know Riverside has dealt with that, but every church I talk to deals with that. Every church is going, I don't know, the next generation just doesn't seem ready. So the people that are holding on to the church, going, it's my way or the highway, we're the ones that are in charge, are getting older and older and older, while the church is getting younger and younger and younger, while we enter the biggest generation gap that we've seen in over 500 years. You guys see the problem. Some point along the way, we decided that the way we did church was the way to do church, and we decided that the God that we worship is not a God that passes the baton from generation to generation. We go, no, it's my God, and it's my church. I'm going to do it my way. And so what Riverside is saying is we're going, man, when I look at this text, when I read this Bible verse in Numbers, when I look in the book of Matthew, and I remember Jesus talking about if only they had faith of a mustard seed. You guys know that verse, right? He says, if only they had faith of the mustard seed, they could move mountains. And then he says, for when planted, the mustard seed becomes bigger than any of the other garden plants. And I look at that and I go, see, that's the problem. There's a lot of people in your church. You look at them and you go, well, they're not ready yet. They don't have much faith. They're not leading. They're not in charge. No, they've got mustard seed faith. It's tiny. It's almost nothing until you plant it. So if the generation that's running churches fails to plant the seed for the next generation, that could have been huge, enormous, monumental faith that moves mountains and saves people and changes nations and moves societies as a whole. Like, that is the catalyst kind of faith that can transform churches and equip people with the life-giving gospel of Jesus Christ. And the only reason it didn't turn into transformational faith is because the people holding the seed never planted the seed. The seed has to be planted for the mustard seed to turn into the enormous, faithful, awesome movement that mustard seed faith is supposed to be. And so our mission as a church, this is what I'm telling you, our mission as a church is to be the church that goes, this is not about me. It's not for me. I don't worship God so that God can bless me and serve me. Jesus Christ came to this earth and said, I came here not to be served, but to serve others. And so we as Christians come to this church and we go, I came here not to be served, but to serve others. Because at the end of the day, it's not about me. I don't worship the God of me and my people and my generation. I worship the God of generation to generation. So I'm going to do everything I can to pass the baton from generation to generation. Guys, that's my message for you this morning. That is our calling as a church. And if you're hearing that, listen, don't feel left out. Don't feel like I'm not speaking to you right now. In order for us to do that, we need you. We need you laser focused on the mission of God to reach people far from God, because the church is for all generations and it's for all people, insiders and outsiders alike. If you're here with us this morning and you are an outsider and you feel separated from God and you feel like you don't have that church community, let me be the first one to apologize to you if we have done anything to make you feel like you don't belong here or like you're less than, because let me tell you, this is your church. And we're calling up leaders in the faith. And this is not the kind of church where you have to be a member here for 10 years before we hand you a microphone or before we let you do anything in this church. We're saying if you're ready to go, we're ready to let you off the leash. If you're ready to be on mission, if you're ready to seek and save lost people, if you're ready to give a little bit of hope and encouragement to a lost, discouraged, hurting world, then we want to do everything we can to equip you and empower you to reach and love other people who are far from God. And so if you're here with us this morning, you're going, where do I fit in? What's my place? Listen, become close with Jesus Christ. Enter into relationship with him. Let the blood of Jesus be the sacrifice, be that sin offering that cleanses you of your sin, so that you can go from outsider to insider, so that you can be part of the family of God, so that you can receive the inheritance that only belongs to those who are part of the family of God, so that you can hand it to all the people who are coming up after you. You older members, you encourage me and you inspire me and you keep me going, and I'm so thankful for you. You younger members, you encourage me and you inspire me and you keep me going, and I'm thankful for it. And if you're around my age, if you're in your season of bests right now, it's going to be the best season of ministry we've ever had. And that means it's going to be tough. And it's going to be really hard, but we're not trying to create a comfortable church for us for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years that we have left. We're creating an uncomfortable church for us so that we can have a blessed church for generations to come after us. And if you're not a part of this, I'm asking you, buy in. Join the church, join a small group, serve in a ministry, give generously, love the people around you, and it all starts by coming into relationship with Jesus Christ. He is the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. He is the God of generation to generation, and it doesn't matter how small you feel or how far off you feel. He loves you, he's here for you, and he's inviting you to clothe yourself in Christ and join the family of God. And if you're ready to do that, you can do that right now. Come forward as we stand and as we sing.
Hi guys, I'm Johann Adendorf, and I oversee all the mission efforts here at Riverside. We are so glad that you watched this message. If it has blessed you, please consider supporting this ministry. Your gifts enable us to make the gospel known all over the world. You can contribute to our mission by visiting riversidechurchofchrist.org/give.